The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light across the misty fields. Birds sang their early morning songs. But for one horse, an aging, blind mare named Grace, the day started with pain, panic, and fear. It happened in a quiet corner of rural Kentucky, where old barns and pastures told stories of generations past. Grace had lived most of her life here. Once a strong and proud show horse, she had lost her sight gradually over the years. Still, she navigated her surroundings with remarkable calm, trusting the familiarity of her routine and the gentle hands of her caretaker, Ellie. But that morning was different. The storm from the night before had knocked over a section of fencing. Grace, frightened by the rolling thunder and sharp cracks of lightning, had wandered outside the paddock in the early hours. Disoriented and unable to see the uneven terrain, she stepped too close to the creek's edge and fell. A thundering splash, then silence. Ellie was inside the barn when she heard it. She froze. Then came the distant cry, the unmistakable, helpless whinny of a horse in distress. She ran, heart pounding, boots slipping on wet grass. Ellie followed the sound through the thick morning fog. "Grace," she shouted. "Grace, where are you?" She finally found her at the bottom of the ravine, half submerged in the shallow creek, tangled in thick mud and brambles. Grace was shaking. One leg bent awkwardly. Her white mane was soaked and streaked with dirt. Her eyes, though blind, held wild panic. "Oh my God," Ellie whispered, falling to her knees beside her. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Grace tried to rise, her muscles trembling violently, but her hind leg wouldn't support her. She collapsed again, letting out a sharp, pained cry. Ellie knew she couldn't lift a full-grown horse alone. With trembling fingers, she dialed the local vet. "It's Grace," she sobbed. "She's down in the creek. She fell. I think she's broken something. Please hurry." The next hour was agony. Word spread quickly. Neighbors arrived with ropes, blankets, and shovels. The vet, Dr. Sanders, showed up 20 minutes later, his truck bouncing down the dirt road. "Don't try to move her yet," he said calmly but firmly. "Let me check her first." He approached slowly, speaking softly as he knelt by Grace. "Easy, girl. Easy. I know you're scared." He ran his hands gently down her leg and winced. The fracture was clear. "It's her hind leg. A bad one," he told Ellie quietly. "We can stabilize it. But it'll take a miracle to get her out of here without doing more damage." Ellie's throat tightened. "She's been with me since I was 14. She taught me to ride. She can't die like this." Dr. Sanders met her eyes. "Then let's try to save her." A harness was fashioned, and Grace was gently sedated. For the next 3 hours, a group of 12 people worked side by side to create a makeshift pulley system. It wasn't fancy, but it was strong. Each tug was met with heavy breathing, sweat, and prayers. As Grace was finally lifted from the mud, her head fell against Ellie's lap. Ellie stroked her nose, whispering, "Stay with me, girl. Just stay with me." But the vet wasn't optimistic. "She's in shock. If she makes it through the night, maybe." They loaded her into the trailer slowly, every bump carefully padded. Ellie never left her side. That night, she slept on the floor of the barn, her hand resting on Grace's neck. At 3:17 a.m., Grace stopped breathing. Then she gasped. Her chest lifted. Her eyes fluttered. And Ellie, barely awake, burst into tears. She wasn't gone. The vet arrived again just before sunrise. He checked her pulse, her leg, her breathing. He shook his head in disbelief. "I don't know how / but she's stabilizing." And then he smiled. "Maybe this is your miracle." To be continued. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Grace was alive, but far from out of danger. The vet wrapped her broken leg in a fiberglass cast and fitted her with a sling to help her stand in the stall. Her pain was managed with medication, but her eyes, those foggy, faded eyes, still held the weight of suffering. And yet they also held something else. Trust. Ellie stayed with her constantly, sleeping on a cot outside the stall, whispering encouragement during the long hours of the night. "You're strong, Grace. You've always been strong. Don't give up now." Grace would flick her ears toward Ellie's voice, nuzzle her hand gently, or rest her chin on the stall door as if to say, "I'm trying." Word of Grace's story began to spread. First among the small farming community, then to a nearby town, and then further, until one day, a journalist from the local news station showed up. "We heard about your horse," she said kindly. "Would you be willing to share her story?" Ellie hesitated. She didn't care about attention. But if it meant help for Grace, financial or emotional support, then yes, she would. The story aired that night. Asterisk, blind horse defies death, a miracle in the making. Asterisk. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in to cover vet bills. Children from nearby schools drew pictures and sent letters addressed to Grace the Brave Horse. An equine rehabilitation center in Tennessee even offered to sponsor advanced therapy sessions, if Grace could be transported safely. Dr. Sanders visited daily. Her vitals are improving, he noted one morning. But the leg, she's got a long road ahead. If she starts walking again, it'll take time. Ellie looked at Grace, who was nibbling hay from her bucket. Time we've got. As long as she's willing. 1 week turned into 2. 2 turned into 4. Grace, though still limited, began bearing a little weight on her leg. With the help of a sling and soft music playing in the background, Ellie encouraged her to shift and stretch. One afternoon, while brushing her mane, Ellie said aloud, "Do you remember the summer fair, Grace? You won the barrel race blindfolded. Just to show off." Everyone was stunned. "I bet you could still do that if you wanted." Grace let out a soft snort, the kind she always made when amused. "You think so too, huh?" Ellie laughed through tears. It wasn't just the physical progress that amazed everyone. Grace's will to live, her connection with Ellie. It was magnetic. Volunteers came to help clean the stalls just to be near her. One boy, Jacob, whose mother had recently passed away, would sit for hours near Grace, resting his head against her shoulder. "She makes me feel like I'm not alone," he once whispered. Grace, it seemed, was healing others even as she was healing herself. On day 38, something unbelievable happened. Grace stood, without the sling. Ellie had just entered the barn with a fresh bucket of water when she saw it. Grace, trembling but upright, her weight awkwardly distributed, but standing. She dropped the bucket. "Oh my God! Grace, you're standing." Tears fell freely as she ran to her side, gently touching her neck, barely daring to believe it. Dr. Sanders came later that afternoon. He watched Grace walk 3 tentative steps toward Ellie. He rubbed his beard, a slow smile spreading. This shouldn't be possible. Not like this. But she did it. Ellie knelt beside Grace and looked her in the eye. "You're not done yet, are you?" The horse blinked slowly, then gently leaned her head into Ellie's chest. But there was still one more test to come. The rehab center in Tennessee had called again. "If she can manage a short trailer ride, we'll start hydrotherapy. It might give her back more than just walking. It could restore balance, strength, maybe even a full recovery." Ellie stood in the barn that night, unsure. "You've come so far, girl," she whispered. "But can you handle the road again?" Grace lifted her head and let out a determined snort. It was her answer. To be continued. The morning of the journey came with a quiet chill in the air. Ellie stood beside the trailer, hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the padded ramp. Grace, freshly groomed and wrapped for travel, waited with calm eyes and ears turned forward. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had followed her story online. One girl clutched a handmade sign. "We believe in you, Grace." Dr. Sanders gave a final check. "She's stronger than ever," he said with a smile. "Just go slow. Let her rest as needed." Ellie took a deep breath, then led Grace toward the trailer. Every step felt sacred. 2 feet on the ramp. A pause. Then the final lift into the trailer. Grace didn't flinch. She didn't stumble. The crowd broke into soft cheers and applause. The trip to Tennessee took nearly 7 hours, with breaks every hour to check her vitals and let her rest. At each stop, Grace would peer outside, ears flicking, as if remembering the wind, the trees, the road. When they finally arrived at the Equine Rehabilitation Center, the staff was waiting. A woman named Dr. Layla greeted them. "We've been following Grace's story from the start. She's famous around here. And we're honored to help her finish what she started." The facility was like nothing Ellie had ever seen. Indoor pools for hydrotherapy, padded training rooms, open-air stalls that smelled of fresh hay and hope. Grace's therapy began gently. First, floating exercises in warm water to relieve pressure on her leg. Then, supported walking sessions on soft sand. And through it all, Ellie never left her side. Week after week, Grace grew stronger. The limp became less noticeable. Her stride grew longer. The muscles in her leg returned, little by little. And every time she took a step, it was more than progress. It was defiance. Defiance against the odds. Against the pain. Against the quiet suggestion that she should have been put down that rainy morning. On the 90th day, the center held a small event. They called it Grace's Gallop. Children, parents, and reporters stood along the paddock fence. Cameras rolled. Ellie stood at the far end, holding a lead rope, though she wouldn't need it. Grace stood at the other side of the paddock. There was a silence. Then Ellie called softly, "Come on, girl." Grace stepped forward, slow at first, then with rising energy. She picked up pace, each hoof landing firm and proud. The crowd gasped. She was galloping. Blind. Once broken. But now galloping. Ellie burst into tears. So did Dr. Sanders, who had driven in just for this moment. When Grace reached Ellie, she nuzzled her gently, then tossed her mane like the champion she had always been. The video of that gallop went viral. Not because of the miracle itself, but because of what it stood for. Hope. Resilience. The power of love to bring back the impossible. Grace spent another month in rehab, but soon returned home. To her familiar stall, the rustling trees, the open pasture. And though she would never see it with her eyes, she felt it in her soul. Ellie installed a new sign above the barn door. It read, "This is the house that Grace built." Years later, school children would come to visit, to pet her, to hear the story of the blind horse who didn't give up. And every time Ellie told the tale, she would end with the same words. Sometimes miracles don't fall from the sky. Sometimes they rise from the mud, on four trembling legs, and run.